Team Chaotix. They're detectives you want on your side. The Sonic the Hedgehog franchise is known for having all sorts of different characters. Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, Amy, Robotnik, they're all classic characters that people know and love. But then there's also the extensive cast of fan-favorite side characters. Think Shadow, Silver, Blaze, Metal Sonic. Or characters who were more prominent in older games like Mighty and Ray. There were also characters that were more heavily featured in the 2000s to early 10s, like Cream, Big, etc. If you take into account all of the games, shows, comics, and just Sonic the Hedgehog media in general, there are well over 100 characters in total. My point is that if you're trying to pick some favorite characters that have potential for interesting directions in game or media, there are a ton of options. And my personal favorite Sonic the Hedgehog characters are Team Chaotix. Vector the Crocodile, Espio the Chameleon, and Charmy Bee make up the detective trio team in Sonic the Hedgehog. And today, I want to delve a bit into why I love these three characters specifically, and also make the case for why I think they deserve their own game. People generally like these guys, but I also think they tend to be overlooked when it comes to people's favorite characters or being featured prominently in media. But their personalities, dynamics, and occupations all give so much fun potential for stories that could be told. So without any further ado, let's look into some of the background surrounding Team Chaotix. Now, each member of Team Chaotix does have their own unique origin besides from being in the games. For example, Charmy Bee had a few iterations in the manga, and Vector the Crocodile was featured in Sonic the Hedgehog Band, which is this glorious piece of artwork. But the first video game media that really established the group was the 1993 Knuckles Chaotix. It was a spin-off featuring Knuckles, Mighty, Vector, Espio, and Charmy as the main characters for the 32X Sega Genesis add-on. Now, I would love to get my hands on this game, but the 32X add-on is pretty expensive. It's about $80 to $150 on eBay, at least as of now on American eBay. Around this time, Sega was still developing the Sega Saturn, and they feared it would not make it to the market by the end of 1994. So to expand the gaming power of the Genesis until the Saturn's release, they created the 32X. It was considered to be a commercial failure though, and outshined greatly by the Sega Saturn itself. It sold poorly, and overall it only had about 40 games made for it, 6 of which also required the CD Genesis add-on. This small library of games compared to other consoles did not help with its market appeal, but the 32X's price is nothing compared to how much Knuckles Chaotix cost. It's $100 to $300, running on the way more expensive end of that if I wanted to get the box and manual with it, which would be most ideal, but probably ain't happening. The cartridge is considered a rare find, likely because this game was also considered a commercial failure. It was rushed out in an attempt to get more people to buy the 32X. Many critics called the ambitious mechanics cumbersome, and I've seen a lot of mixed reviews on the game as well, with some people liking it but most hating it, or a lot of people calling it mid at best. And so the game fell into relative obscurity, and became rare as a result. I'm not sure if I'm ready to drop $400 just to play one game, but I am obsessed with it anyways, and so I'll probably bite the bullet and buy it someday. Maybe if this video gets like 50 likes, I'll buy it and play it for a video? Maybe? I'd love to go more in depth with this game. I think for now I'll just cover the basics of its history and content. So Knuckles Chaotix is a game about Knuckles, the Chaotix, Robotnik, and Metal Sonic on this mysterious island. Knuckles and friends have to prevent Metal and Eggman from gathering these 6 magic rings. It implements a system called the tethering system where 2 characters are tethered together. To summarize how this works, we're going to take 2 Chaotix characters, and we're just going to tie the string around them like they're fucking babies on a baby leash. They need to be tied together. I probably should have cut this string shorter, but that's fine. And once you've got them all tied together, they're just connected now. So you could fucking swing them all over the fucking place. So now it doesn't fucking matter what one of them do, because they're all tethered together, so that way there's new mechanics with the way that they fucking move. Because of this unique system, the game was actually in a way pretty adventurous, trying to develop this innovative new playing system. It is pretty interesting with how each character has their own unique abilities and how that impacts the way that they navigate through the levels. Though I haven't played the game myself, I can't really comment on how it feels to play. I have heard both opinions from others that some people don't really like the mechanic as it was a little difficult to master and the way that it controls and the momentum system. But on the other hand, I have also heard people say that it makes for a fun and interesting gameplay experience, since it allows the characters more mobility. There were 5 main levels in the game itself, with each one having 5 acts. I've heard people complain about how they felt that the levels were lackluster. There aren't as many zones as in other Sonic games from around the same time, and some reviews also criticized the levels themselves for feeling repetitive and having simple bosses. But honestly, I'm kind of obsessed with all of these stages. One of the biggest reasons why I'm so fascinated with this game and would love to get my hands on it is the overall visual style. The color palettes in this one are very bold, vibrant, and detailed. So many of the stages look like a colorful mess. I could see people criticizing the art for maybe seeming cluttered with the pure amount of saturated-ass, bright-ass colors used and the detail that's in everything, but I personally love it. I think that this game uses color very well in a way that's just very visually appealing eye candy to me. Reason number 2 why I would love to get my hands on this game: the soundtrack fucking slaps and has some iconic bangers. Many of the songs I've already used in this video have been from this soundtrack, including the song that you're hearing right now, which is Door into Summer. I honestly don't think this game has a single bad soundtrack, so go check it out immediately. Reason number 3, I do think that it's rather cool what the game was trying to achieve, with its ambitious ideas for new mechanics and concepts. Whether you think it actually achieved its goal poorly or did it well, it's still really admirable just what they were trying to do. And finally, the biggest and main reason that all of this is even relevant to this video to begin with is that this game is the origin for some of the major facets of the characters we know and love today, Team Chaotix. Now, a lot has changed since these guys' debut in this original game, so many of the elements that we see here are either completely non-canon to the versions of the characters we see now, which this could reasonably be explained by the classic and modern characters being separate universes and characters, but the classic characters do serve as the foundations for the characters that we see now, so I want to go over all of them briefly so we can understand how these characters were originally portrayed, and then we can examine all the changes that happened in them later. I do want to mention that while Mighty the Armadillo is technically a part of this original Chaotix group, in the modern games he's no longer really affiliated with the Chaotix, so I won't really be talking about him too much. I'm sorry, Mighty fans. Maybe someday I'll talk about him and Ray more in a different video, because I could totally go off about the games they was in too. Let's start with the future leader of the group, Vector the Crocodile. In this game, he's 16 and canonically believes in the existence of God, and so he came to this island because he heard that this was an island of miracles. I genuinely don't mean to offend anyone who does believe in God, but imagining Vector the fucking crocodile as Catholic is really funny to me. Anyways, the manuals highlight his kind, good, optimistic nature, and it also establishes what is probably one of Vector's most important traits, his love of music. Him having the trait of loving music was probably originally a reference to how Vector's initial design came from him being in a band, and thus it was referenced with the character design of his headphones. In the game, his idle animation even has him jamming out to some tunes, which is pretty fun. Also in the English manual, they mention a love of food, which will become more important to his character later. I feel like this Vector is a really fun character. He's slightly less tough-seeming than his future iterations, but it still establishes many of his core traits, being kind-hearted, a little silly, and loving music and food. Also, even if I prefer his later design, I still think that the blue adds an interesting component to his color palette. It gives him a more fun vibe, which suits this Vector rather well. Next up, my favorite Sonic character of all time. Let's introduce Espio. He was actually the oldest out of the entire Chaotix group at 17, and interesting, he starts off the game as having been captured by Robotnik in one of his machines. Knuckles saves him, after which he joins the group. Because of this, he has an intense hatred for Dr. Robotnik and is described as being angry and intense to the point where Charmy B, out of all people, has to remind him of his manners. I do think this is a really good concept, having one of the main characters begin as someone who is directly hurt by Robotnik, and so now they hold a grudge, and it works for Espio in creating a serious, stubborn character. Now in the original Japanese manual, they do specify that Espio is a detective and very skilled at combat training and gathering information. This, alongside with his personality, gave Espio a very strong characterization. And ultimately, out of the three main members, it's probably the most important characterization for how they took the Chaotix group going forward. One more cool ability Espio has in this game is the ability to change his color! I know that modern Espio uses a similar ability to turn invisible, which could be explained by him changing to the color of his surroundings, but otherwise nowadays we never really see him turn any color other than his signature purple. And that's a damn shame, because I personally find the color changing concept really cool because number one, it reflects the real abilities of chameleons who can change colors, and number two, having a character who can change in reaction to his environment or emotions and having that be visually represented with color change is awesome. Third of all, pretty colors are just epic to look at. Look at this guy! Good time to mention how much I love the sprite work in this game. It's very nice and conveys the characterization rather well through the animation. Last but not least is Charmy B, who's probably the most different in personality to his modern counterpart. The English manual specifies that he is 16 years old, and he is also described as surprisingly sophisticated, moody, and mature. Okay, man. He is the fastest insect in the world, and he came to the island in search of new flowers. His speed is somewhat reflected in the game itself with how fast this guy darts around the screen. He's also much smaller than the other characters if you're looking close at the sprite work. Honestly, this iteration of Charmy has a much more serious, older seeming personality compared to his modern personality, and there isn't a lot that they kept. However, I think that his speed somewhat translated into hyperactivity in the later version, so it's important to note. Also, his love of things such as flowers is important, although that's obviously just reflective of Charmy being a bumblebee. I'm gonna be honest, I feel like a lot of the Knuckles Chaotix characters have somewhat similar personalities. Characters like Knuckles, Espio, and Charmy in this case all tend to be very serious in their mission to stop Robotnik and his plans, which I do think that's a noble goal, and I like that all of them have a shared interest in doing so. I honestly think that Mighty and Vector are the ones providing the most contrast here. They both also want to stop Robotnik, and while Mighty is noted to be very strong, mighty, and good at fighting, he doesn't like being rough with others, and he prefers to be calm and avoid violence if necessary. I also think this can help reel back characters such as this iteration of Espio or Knuckles, who once again are noted to be somewhat aggressive and have a temper. Vector also serves as one of the most light-hearted in the group. Compared to all the others, he's the most fun, so it might make for some interesting contrast in character dynamics. Now, there are a lot of different ways to build a group of characters with strong dynamics, and in my personal opinion, this is best done by giving the characters good contrast in their personalities. And while I think that the modern iteration of the Chaotix really honed in on this and accomplished it the best, I do like this version of the group. Even if the personalities are slightly different from how we know them today, it's very interesting and fun to see the basis of where these characters came from. Plus, Knuckles and Mighty being in the group does add for some interesting ideas in terms of character interactions. I think that just about establishes the main basics of what we need to know about the history of the Chaotix original game and characterization. Because in 2003, everything that we knew about Team Chaotix was about to change forever. Sonic Heroes is my favorite Sonic game of all time. I do not understand why people don't like it. Sonic fans really just like to hate anything that's fun, but we're not here to talk about the quality of this game today. In fact, I have another video that I'm currently working on where I will review Sonic Heroes in full, but for now, what you need to know for the sake of this video is this. This game uses this concept of having 4 different teams of 3 characters. Each team goes through the same levels, but they each have a unique storyline. It's also cool because sometimes the characters will cross paths with the other teams and it leads to fights. I think that this is a good concept because for me personally, one of the things that makes stories and media so good is the characters. Their different personalities, how they grow, and their personal goals, and how those goals impact their actions and how they interact with others. And creating teams of characters, all with different personalities, powers, and dynamics where each character navigates a level in their own way, and they all have to work together to succeed, there's something neat about that. Now, for most of the teams, the requirements for completing the levels are kind of the same, which is a little bit boring, I'll admit. 3 of the 4 teams just have the main goal of getting to the end of the level, plain and simple. But there is one exception, that being probably the most entertaining team to play, in my personal opinion. The main 3 teams are Team Sonic, Team Dark, Team Rose, and then the main team for the focus of our analysis is Team Chaotix. These guys hadn't really been featured prominently since their video game in 1995, if you exclude the Archie comics, which I am going to exclude the Archie comics for this video. I'm sorry, I know there are Archie fans out there, and I know that these guys were used a lot in the comics, but frankly, I don't like Archie very much. I feel like it was kind of tainted from Ken Pender's involvement, and I feel like some of the characterizations are incorrect when compared to their game counterparts. And to be more objective, it has a lot of storylines in it, and all of that is very complicated, and so for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to exclude those comics from the scope of this video. I am sorry. Besides from the comics, Espio was in Sonic the Fighters, but besides that, the Chaotix didn't really have anything huge going on with them, story or game-wise. Anyways, this was their first major video game appearance since the Knuckles Chaotix game. It marks the point when Sega redesigned their characters for the modern iteration, changed the trajectory of their storyline, and, in my opinion, refined and strengthened their characterization and personality dynamics with each other. They fit perfectly into the game and play as one of the more interesting teams gameplay-wise, because as detectives, they aren't simply trying to get to the end of the level, they're following different specific tasks from their mysterious client, which can range from finding different items, destroying all of the robots in a level, putting out torches in a mysterious castle, etc. A lot of their missions force you to stop and interact and look at more of the different locations in the game, which is a good concept. Anyways, like I said, the Chaotix were completely overhauled for this game, so let's briefly review all of our characters and look at what's changed. Vector the Crocodile is one of the best, most well-rounded characters that I think could be made for the leader position of a group. Though I also think that his character is super underappreciated and overlooked, especially in comparison with the other more popular characters like Espio or one of the actual main characters. Vector is a few years older now, he's 20, making him the only adult and the leader boss of the Chaotix detective agency. That's right, they went ahead and just took that aspect of Espio being a detective from the manual before and just made all 3 of them a detective agency group. Now maybe it's just because I'm a huge fan of mystery solving games, but I think detective characters can be a lot of fun and open up opportunities for their stories to be about solving interesting or fun mystery stories. Anyways, Vector's got the responsibility of running the agency and taking care of all their needs. Bills, feeding the kids, making sure all their work is maintained, etc. He's a cool, in-charge leader, and while he's very easygoing and tries to be rational, at the same time he could be a bit bossy, loudmouth, and he has a short temper and will yell if things don't go his way. Vector is also very smart. I know Espio is painted to be the smart one in the group, but I think while Espio is good at figuring out in-the-moment deductions and the like, Vector usually has a better view of the bigger picture as a whole. For example, in Sonic Heroes, he solved the case and figured out who their client was way before the other Chaotix members did, and he's generally good at conducting plans of how they should all go about their investigations. He's also pretty thorough and will see cases all the way through to the end. I know the Sonic Boom TV show mischaracterizes and exaggerates the characters' personalities for the sake of comedy, but an example of this trait is in that show when Vector continues to solve the case of who really stole Amy's hammer, even after they arrested a suspect. Now, the Chaotix are notoriously poor and they kinda struggle with paying all of their bills. This is mentioned constantly in the games when Vector says things like that they're behind on rent, or they forgot to pay their electricity or something, or in the anime when the kids are crying about how they got free food when they weren't able to afford it. This is why one of Vector the Crocodile's favorite things in the game is money. There are a lot of jokes about how he's very materialistic, money-oriented, and will do pretty much anything to get his hands on some cash.
When did you get a reality show?
When they paid me big-time TV do-re-mi.
You should probably see an optometrist about that.
But I really don't think it comes from a place of selfishness or anything like that. Rather, I think it stems from wanting security. Security for his agency, insurance that they won't go hungry or lose their power or roof over their head. He wants to provide for everyone, and he also wants to treat himself and Espio and Charmy to nice things, like eating out at nice places. I also think this reflects one of Vector's character traits that originated from his classic counterpart, Vector's kind nature. See, Vector paints himself as a cool, tough crocodile, but as he says in the anime,
I may be lean, mean, and green, but behind my cool croc exterior, I'm really just a big old softy. Just don't let that get around, though, you got me? I got a reputation! A detective's gotta be tough, so let's just keep this between you and me, okay?
Vector has a soft spot in his heart for helping others, especially kids or those who can't afford their services. For example, it's mentioned that he will take up cases for free if they're for someone like a child less fortunate than him. And most of all, he cares for Espio and Charmy. Those boys are practically his kids at this point, so I think it's reasonable to assume that a lot of Vector's love for money and security is just wanting those two to be taken care of. Some of the other aspects they brought over from the previous iterations of Vector are his love of food and music. All of the Chaotix are actually a big fan of eating a lot of big meals now, which again is probably linked to how they might struggle with paying for it often. And Vector's love of music returns once again with a depiction of his signature headphones. All of the Chaotix are also in a band together, which might be a reference to how Vector was originally in a band himself. Now, can the Chaotix actually sing well? No! I think that the modern design of Vector does a good job making him look more sleek, cool, and tough. The older design is a lot more goofy and lighthearted in comparison. Now, let's move on to Espio, my favorite character like I said before. Espio is 16, and he's by far the coolest one in the group since he's a ninja detective. He's calm, collected, skilled at ninja fighting, as well as sneaking and turning invisible. He's also, quote-unquote, very opinionated and self-obsessed. Espio is very much so focused on morals and justice, to the point where he won't want to investigate a case, and will try to turn down work if he thinks the client is morally dubious, which will become a point of contention with Vector, but we'll discuss that all later. I think the self-obsessed part of his personality is shown less often, but it is certainly still present. Espio cares about his appearance itself greatly, and has been shown to be very proud of and focused on how cool, skilled, and intelligent he is.
My name's Charmy, and I can be...
My name is Espio. I'm the brains in this organization. I also possess some killer spy skills. I'm smart. I'm quick on my feet. I also happen to be a ninja.
He's also full of himself.
It's better to be full of myself than to be an obnoxious pipsqueak.
Overall, though, I think that he is much more level-headed and rational than in his original appearance in Knuckles Chaotix. Also, while I love the green and purple combo in his classic design, I just feel like the purple and black suits Espio so well, as it highlights his cool, serious nature just by focusing on these sleek, darker colors. Again, we don't really see him change colors that often anymore, but he does turn invisible as a trade-off. Charmy is probably the character who changed the most. He went from being 16 to being 6, and he's now a hyperactive child who's very excitable and written to be annoying at times. Now, I know a lot of people don't like Charmy because of said annoying nature, but to me, Charmy is really cute and fun. I think the way he will provoke Vector and intentionally get on his nerves or be silly is kind of accurate to how some little kids will act. His cheerful and hyper energy is fun and cute, and it does a lot to balance out the group dynamic, which is what we'll get into next. Part of what makes Team Chaotix so enjoyable to watch is the fact that each one of their personalities bounce off of each other in an interesting way, creating compelling character interactions and conflict. They work as a team and have a unified goal, and they will work together, but there are also parts of their characters that clash with each other. For example, Vector's short temper might come into conflict with Charmy's hyperactivity, especially when Charmy is prone to intentionally provoking him, leading to silly little arguments between the two. Another example is how Espio and Vector might come into conflict regarding cases. It's shown that Espio is much more hesitant to take on just any old case, while Vector is very much the opposite, since taking on cases can net them some cash. The most obvious example of this is in Sonic Heroes. Since they don't know the identity of their client, Espio says,
I've got a bad feeling about this.
But Vector just kind of brushes aside all of his concerns. And even though he figures out Eggman is their client partway through the case, he still doesn't really seem to have any qualms with taking on the case until the very end when he realizes that Eggman is not going to pay them. This isn't to say that Vector will throw aside all of his morals to take on cases, but he is willing to do so more just for money, and this can create some really interesting conflict with Espio's extremely just nature. We even see at the end of Sonic Rivals 2, when Espio basically just lets the suspect get away, Vector throws a fit because of the fact that they needed to take on that case for money. True, Espio wasn't really explaining well to Vector that Silver was the culprit for entirely just causes. He let Silver go because he thought Silver was in the moral right for saving the world, and the fact that he clearly had a big gay-ass crush on him. For real, there is no canonical reason that I can see for Espio acting so nervous and stuttery when he is shown to be competent, cool, and under control during his spying espionages literally every other time in the series. Even when he gets caught, he never loses his cool unless it's Silver. There's also this, but anyways, that's a huge tangent aside. My point is that the clash of morals and personalities leads to these conflicts, which in turn makes for a more interesting story overall. Overall, Charmy is definitely the most extreme and high energy out of the group. Vector is sort of in the middle, with him being mostly laid back, but his temper or his general silly nature can rope him into silly shenanigans. I think my favorite example of silly Vector shenanigans is in the anime when Vector, who clearly watches too many romance movies, sees Tails being autistic over his machines, and he misunderstands and thinks that Tails is some poor, shy soul who can't confess that he has a crush on Cosmo. So he spends the rest of the episode shipping them and trying all sorts of crazy plots to get them together. This is fucking butchered to all hell and back in the English version, because they cut out the setup to the punchline. In the original, there's these really funny, overdramatic scenes where Vector will set up his plots with some crazy story, and they're all overdramatic and silly. Some of the silliness is enhanced because Vector himself is doing the voices, and it's terrible.
テイルさん、男らしい。これくらい何でもありませんよ。かくして二人はラブラブになりましたとさ。
Vector gets the rest of the Chaotix to help him execute his plans, and of course they all fail miserably because Vector has no fucking clue what he's actually doing. But in the English version, they cut out arguably the funniest part of Vector setting up the plans, and what's essentially the setup to the entire joke. So as an American viewer, you're not thinking to yourself, oh haha, what a terrible way to carry out that silly plan. You're thinking to yourself, why the fuck did Charmy just chloroform Knuckles, and what are they doing with his body? Because they don't show us what the Chaotix plan actually is, so it's just Chaotix doing silly random shit, and you don't have any context! Okay, that was a huge ramble, I'm sorry. My point is, Charmy is chaotic, and although Vector is way more laid back than him, he can still get involved in some pretty crazy, high-energy, silly moments. And all of this makes it so Espio is definitely the straight man of the group, being the most calm and under control in demeanor, which allows him to rein in some of the other two's craziness. Not to say that Espio never has any silly moments. Like, in the comics, he kind of cracks jokes a lot in issue 48, but he helps to prevent the group from being too over-the-top and exaggerated for it to be enjoyable. Overall, the dynamics they all have with each other balance it all out, and it makes for an interesting and fun interactions. So, you may have noticed that a lot of the games I've discussed so far have been older games. Sure, Knuckles Chaotix was all the way back in 1995, but games like Sonic Heroes, which was the main game to completely redesign and establish the Chaotix as we know them today, but Sonic Heroes came out back in 2003, which I know some of you older Sonic fans, it might not feel like that game is that old, but like, I was born in 2003. I'm 20. This game is 20 years old. So I think it's fair to call it a bit of an older game for sure. The team definitely had some more presence back in the 2000s with Sonic Heroes, Sonic X. They were in Shadow the Hedgehog, Espio had a storyline in Sonic Rivals 2, they were in the DS version of Sonic Colors, they were in Sonic Generations in 2011, etc. But where are the Chaotix now, in games released within the past couple of years? Well, they were in Sonic Forces as a part of the fight against Eggman, they talked sometimes during the levels, and they were featured in the cutscenes. They were also in the Sonic Forces comics, and they had a presence in the IDW comics as well, most prominently with their involvement with the Zombot art. It's fucking heartbreaking how initially Vector is super serious and rational, sacrificing people who had been infected, but when his baby boy Charmy gets infected, they get super irrational, and they bring him into the base, eventually leading to Vector getting turned into a Zombot and SPO crying and grieving over the other Chaotix being lost to the virus. Amazing job of showing all of their bonds and how they can act in real danger. Again, IDW comics are awesome. And they were also investigating some of the cases caused by the other villains in the comics, leading to them even getting their very own issue. Going back to the video games, the Chaotix have also made appearances in the Sonic and Mario at the Olympics crossover games. Vector is usually the only one that's actually playable, but SPO is an unlockable character for one of the events in the Tokyo 2020 version. Fucking loser. Also, in some of the events, Charmy can be seen in the background as a referee, even if he isn't playable. In previous games, he's even had voice lines, but I don't think they've done that in any of the recent Olympic Games.
Okay!
Yeah! I did so good! Yay! Do I win? Fuck! No! They were in Team Sonic Racing. Or rather, Vector and Vector alone was in Team Sonic Racing. SPO and Charmy get mentioned by name in the storyline, but they don't actually make any appearances, which is odd to me. The whole game is about racing in teams of 3, but instead of racing with SPO and Charmy, Vector is instead racing with Blaze and Silver. Like, even if they didn't want to expand the roster to be bigger, why couldn't they have sat in the back of Vector's car like they do in the comics? That way they could have also had fun dialogue during the racing parts, and there would have been at least included. Don't tell me that's cheating. The Chao have like 5 fucking people in their car, so Vector could reasonably have his kids in the back. His Team Ultimate theme is literally the Team Chaotix theme song, but the rest of his team isn't even there! Team Dark is there, Team Sonic is there, Team Rose is almost there, the Cream has also been forgotten about in recent years, but like, where's Team Chaotix? And honestly, for a while, that was pretty much it for the Chaotix. I'm sad to say that in recent games, they haven't really had prominent roles. The most was in Sonic Forces, but other than that, they've been relegated to being background side characters who sometimes make appearances if we're lucky. And honestly, that's a huge shame. I'm not just saying this because they're my favorite characters and I'm a bit biased, but these characters are super fun and they have great potential for video games. I'll go a bit more into this later, but for a while I was obsessed with the idea of them being in some sort of detective mystery-solving game that utilized Sonic elements. Because mystery games are fun, and I thought it would be a perfect way to utilize the Chaotix's profession as detectives. I legit wrote out paragraphs about my dream Sonic mystery-solving detective game featuring the Chaotix. And then the Murder of Sonic the Hedgehog came out. The Murder of Sonic the Hedgehog was a free game released this year for April Fool's Day. If you haven't played it yet, please do, because there will be spoilers in this section. You can skip to this section of the video if you want to avoid any discussion of the actual plot or culprit. It's a story that follows Sonic and friends as they board a train for Amy's birthday party, and it is quite literally my dream game. Like, when it first dropped, I got about 1 million notifications from my friends messaging me like, "Hey Casey, your autism game dropped." It's no secret that I had been really wanting a Sonic-related mystery-solving game. It's in the same vein as something like Ace Attorney or Professor Layton, especially Mystery Room. Now, it's not exactly like those games, those are just the closest comparisons I can make. It's a murder mystery birthday party, and Sonic is the one killed. You play as a Quokka named Barry, who has to assist Tails and Amy in determining who the real culprit is. Now, the Chaotix aren't really the main characters like I was wishing, though that's not particularly a surprise. In fact, Charmy's not even in this game, but SPO and Vector are, as the Poet and Butcher respectively. First of all, I just love this game's art style in general, but their sprites are super gorgeous. Vector and SPO also have a wonderful chemistry dynamic with each other here. I love how enthusiastic and genuine Vector is. It feels especially in character, and it's also good at showing how much he cares about SPO, with how he rushes to his defense as soon as anyone accuses him of anything, because he trusts SPO so much and genuinely believes he would never do anything wrong. SPO is also written very well, and you can tell how much he's trying to keep his cool and stay in character, and he really embraces his role as the poet. Also, I fucking knew he would write overdramatic ass poetry. I knew it! Okay, last final warning for spoilers of who the culprit is. I think that the way that SBO fully embraces and tries to cover up his role as the killer is really well done as well. I mean, I kinda knew it as soon as I heard his shady-ass, flimsy-ass alibi, but I think he did his best. It highlights how serious, determined, and dramatic he can be. Overall, wonderful game with a lot of charm, humor, and love put into it. I think that it also did a wonderful job with Vector and Espio, and I hope to see more stuff like this in the future. Sega! I know no one from Sega is watching, but if you hypothetically were, this is my plea to you, and ultimately the main message that I want to send with this video. The Chaotix deserve to have their own game already, and here's why. Number one, these characters have been around since some of the very first Sonic games, and while their characters have obviously changed since then, I think that has helped them become utterly iconic characters. That, and the fact that their personalities are so well-rounded and make for a very fun time. Even if they never get their own new game, a remix or a remake of Knuckles Chaotix would be super fucking cool. That game was only ever re-released once for a brief period of time in 2005 on Mac OS X and Windows computers through the subscription game service GameTap, which obviously shut down so it's not available now, and that's it. Despite being the origin for Vector, Charmy, and Espio in the video games, and featuring Mighty, who has only ever been in 2 other games, one of which was an arcade game, and despite many fans asking for the games to be re-released in some sort of games collection like Sonic Origins, it hasn't ever really happened. Which sucks because, again, not only is the game monumental in introducing these characters, but it's considered rare nowadays, and because of how poorly it sold. So you would have to spend a couple $100s if you wanted to play it, even more if you didn't have a Genesis or a 32X already. I mean, there is pirating and ROM hacks, which I'm not opposed to, but it would be cool to have this game re-released officially. Now, a lot of people have speculated that the reason why this game hasn't seen any kind of re-release is because of the fact that it was on the 32X. Not only did that thing sell poorly and become obscure through it only really having a couple of games that you could play on it, but it is much more difficult to emulate or recreate than normal Genesis games because of the hardware that it was on. Critically, the game was average at best, so even if it was a cool game that people would want to see again, there isn't really a lot of incentive for Sega to remake it, which is a shame, but hey, maybe if there's enough demand for it in the future, or the love for the Chaotix grows, we'll see this game again someday. Second reason they need their own game, Team Chaotix as a group have the potential to make a great story, either involving their careers as detectives, or just through the way that they interact with each other. Games like Sonic Heroes or Sonic Rivals 2 actually use them investigating a case as a plot point, and I think solving crimes or mysteries has great potential for stories. Hell, even if Murder of Sonic the Hedgehog was an April Fool's joke, it was still a really fun and enjoyable game that used mystery solving as a plot point. My main gripe with the game was that the think segments where Barry has to connect their thoughts. Let me explain using another video game as an example, Ace Attorney Miles Edgeworth Investigations. In that game, there's a mechanic called Logic. It follows the same idea of Murder of Sonic the Hedgehog's think mechanic, with Miles having to connect his thoughts in a way that helps him to solve the case. But in that game, it's directly related to you picking out pieces of evidence and piecing them together. In Murder of the Sonic the Hedgehog, you just kinda did a Sonic-esque minigame, which I understand why they wanted it to feel more like a Sonic game, but it just didn't work for me. You know how you fix this problem though? There are a few different ways. One is you could have a game like Heroes. You could have the game operate like a Sonic game with different levels and story bits in the middle to paint the picture of solving the case. Or if you wanted to do something more unique, you could have a mystery-solving game like Murder Of, where the characters will talk to each other in dialogue segments or have arguments and confrontations, but instead you could have an overworld you're able to move the characters around in. If the characters can walk around and interact with things to find clues, you could even implement more Sonic elements like enemies attacking you as you try to solve the case or something. I hate to keep bringing up Sonic Heroes as an example of what to do, but you could even make it so each character could access different clues, like Charmy being able to fly higher to grab things that are out of reach, Espio's able to turn invisible and sneak off to otherwise off-limits areas or be able to spy on people to find different clues. Vector could be able to break obstacles, etc. But to be completely honest with y'all, a good Chaotix game doesn't even have to be anything like Murder Of. It could just be a good classic-style Sonic game. I'm just starving for content of them, and I would love to see new stories with these characters. There are also just a lot of cases that they could solve, like, oh no, Eggman is up to something and they have to investigate it. Or maybe they could even solve a missing persons case. I don't know. I don't care what kind of case they're solving, but you have the potential to do anything and make it an interesting story when it's with these guys. And the third and final reason why Team Chaotix deserve their own game already, I just think the Chaotix deserve more attention in general. I've demonstrated that they haven't really been that prominent in recent games, and it would just be really cool to have them back, man. I love Team Chaotix. They've had a really interesting history, and I really think Sega has done such a great job with making an enjoyable and fun trio of characters. It's disappointing how underutilized they've been in the games, especially in recent years. They have so much potential to create really fun, intriguing stories and unique, exciting games, and I just hope that we can see more of them in the future. Thank you guys so much for watching this all the way to the end. Sorry this was kind of just a long rant about my fondness for these characters, but I hope you enjoyed listening at the very least. Let me know in the comments if you guys have any other ideas for games that these guys could be in, or if there are any other Sonic characters that you think deserve more love. If you guys are watching this around the same time it comes out, then just know I have a couple more videos in the works at the moment, and so I hope you guys enjoy those in the future. And also, hey, Art Fight's about to start. If you're on that, you should totally join me on there. Maybe get some free art of mine. Again, thank you guys so much for watching. I think that's all for now.